Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel Techie Kumar. In this video, we are going to talk about the importance and the efficient use of optional in Java 8. So we have been using optional, but today I will tell you how we can use this efficiently and in a proper way to get the most benefit of this feature. So let's get into the code and we will keep learning with the code here. So let's go get into the code lab. So here is the code. So let's see first how we handle the null pointer exception in a traditional way. So let me run this first. Okay, so here I'm getting null pointer exception. Why? Because the version is null, and that's the reason I'm getting null pointer exception. I'm calling equals method on the null object. So the traditional way of handling is we do like this, version not equal to 1. So we use equal operator to identify if the version object is null or not. If it is not null, then only we are proceeding ahead and calling the equals method. So let me rerun this code. So here we go. So we have fixed the null pointer exception. So what's the other way? So in prior to Java 8, we were been doing like this, but in Java 8, the most important feature what arrived is optional. So we have learned like what is optional. Optional is there to avoid null pointer exceptions. So if we use optional, how we could avoid this error or doing the same thing to handle the null pointer exception. So let's see how we could do it. So we can use optional. First we need to create optional of the object. So optional of a string. So we are going to create optional of, let me import this. Okay, and this would be like version opt equal to optional dot, and there are two methods which creates optional. First is off and another is off nullable. So whenever you have an object which may be null, you should go with off nullable, and if it is not null, you are sure 100% sure that it could never be null anytime in future, then you can use off, because if anything that could be null, then it will throw exception. So let's use off first and let's see how it's working. So if we are using version here, right, so we are using version, and then to avoid, we have one method in optional which says is present. So if optional has some value, then it returns true, and based on that decision we call the equals method. So to get the object from the optional, we call optional dot get, right? So this is the way how we handle it. So let me run this. We are still getting null pointer exception. Why? Because here you can see we have used optional of, and it is saying that objects dot require non null. We are using of where we should provide non null values. Okay, and this null, because the string has null, we saw in the beginning, right? So we cannot use this one. So what we should use, you can read the definition saying that the value to describe which must be non-null. You can read here, right, which must be non-null. So that's why, because we don't know like this version would be null or not, so we should use of nullable. Good. Now the thing is, we have defined of nullable with version. So let me rerun this again. Okay, so this null pointer exception is fixed with the help of optional. Guys, now the question is this the way to use optional, and is this the only purpose this optional is developed? So what I should say, no. So there is very solid reason of using this optional in a better way. Okay, so let me show you. Prior to that, let me tell you this get API version, you can consider that this API version is getting the data or version of an API from an external application which may return null or not, that we don't know. Okay, so that's why we handle this using optional, but this is not the efficient way of using. Okay, so what we should do, we should use this optional in another way. So let me show you the code how we could do this. So for that, let me open this utility class, and here I have written another version of get API method, and this get API method, this is get safe version, and there what I'm doing, let's consider this piece of code is returning the API version from the third party which may be null or not, we are not sure. So what we are going to do in this method, in the utility method, we are writing the code like this. We are saying if this method is null, return optional dot empty, and if it is not null, then return optional dot off. Why we are using off here? Because we have already checked this piece of code is never going to return null when it reaches here. Okay, so now we have this method get safe API version. So let's use this one. Good. I have modified this code using the new method which is get safe API version. So you can see here get safe API version is returning optional. So if I try to use this method here, it will complain saying that this method is returning optional, not a real object. So you must have to create an reference of optional, not an object, and from that optional you have to get the real object as and when you need it, right? So let me just remove this line. So now we have received this optional object in this reference, and now we are checking version optional dot is present. As I said, in this get safe API version, if the data is null, this method is returning empty. That's why we are calling it here option version of dot is present. You could use is empty as well. Apart from this, you can use any method is empty or is present. So if you are using is empty, then we have to use exclamation sign saying that is not empty, right? So it's better to use is present, which makes more sense here. So when you are using version of dot is present, it says that if the data is available in the optional, then only we should go ahead and call the equals method. Now we are having get method here to get the real object out of the optional. So guys, maybe in upcoming videos I will create one video on the optional where we will discuss different methods of optional. But here the agenda of this video is to talk about the efficient use of optional. Okay, so let's focus here. So now we are going to compare this, and then if the data is null, in that case it will be handled nicely. So let me rerun this code again. Okay, so now you are seeing that this time data is not okay, data this time is data is also null, but it is handled, right? So that's why when it is null, it comes here and saying that this version is not safe to use. So it's better to wait for the next version. So now let's return okay some value. If I return some value here, the exact value what it is looking for, and then if I rerun the application, okay, so now this time data is present because I have put 1.0 here. So this is not null and this is not null, that's why it will return the data from here optional dot off. So we will have the optional here, the return type is optional of a string, and that optional of a string, when we are checking it, or version op dot is present, yes, it will have that data, and then we are calling the object, and then after we are having this output. Okay, so let me debug it and see how it looks like when we have the data. So let me make it null first and then rerun in debug mode. So we want to check what we are seeing in this. So enable the debug as Java application. Okay, so now we have version opt here. If you see here, it's saying that optional of null. So optional of null means there is nothing. When we say optional dot is present, then it will return false. So if we go ahead, so it returns false, and that's why we are in the else part. Good. Now see the console, we have this output. Again, let's put some value, the exact value what it's looking for. So now if we rerun the code again, we can run it from here as well, debug application. So this time this has the object, right? This has the value optional. So optional is just like a box which will always have your object, whatever the type of object you have defined inside the optional. If not, then it will be called as empty. So now here if we go, so this value will return true, and based on that we will proceed ahead and compare the value with the string, and then it goes inside and it prints this output. Good. So that's all about this. So the agenda of this video is to let you guys know how to use this optional efficiently. Using optional, just creating optional, using off method, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, you should always create your underlying methods which are being consumed throughout the application in this way. You should return optional in somewhere if it is going to be null. Excuse me. If you are sure or if you are in doubt, in both cases, like if there is a condition where you think like you can have data as null, go with optional, so that wherever you are going to consume this method, you handle them. If you are writing method like this without having optional, in that case you will not be know, or you may do mistake to skip the null comparison. That's the reason you start writing your methods in this way, if that method is going to return optional. For example, if I am going to write a method public int sum, in this case we don't need to use optional, because if we are not passing these values, right, so it won't allow you to run this, and when the values are inside, then it will always return sum. So if we try to call it here, let me call it here s out, and if I try to call app utility dot sum, and then here I need to must pass value. We could not pass some other thing, right? We must have to pass the integer value. So you cannot skip this. So there is no chance that you will get null in this case, right? You will always, even see guys, it's primitive, right? Even if you put integer here, so even in this case also you are not going to get null, because whatever we get inside an argument, that will be returned as sum. So here you don't need to create optional. So So now I hope you understood, right? So when to create optional and when not. It's not like for each method should have the optional return type. No, it should be return type optional only in the case where you are not sure whether this method will return null or not. If it may return null, then always go with optional and handle that optional throughout your code to make your code free from null pointer exceptions. This brings me to the end of this video. If you really liked it, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe my channel. Thank you very much for watching my videos.